Starting the other stream. Okay, the stream's should be going now. So
Everywhere?
yeah, so I'm going to go. Well, I mean, I'll be here, but uh,
All right. Cool. Well, I'll just give her big keys. Okie dokie. Hello. So, this is my second installment of the Origins of Found Footage panel that I did. This one is called Mockumentary Ancestry, an exploration of the connection between early mockumentaries and modern found footage. So, if anybody was at my previous panel that I did, this is kind of like a prequel rather than a sequel because it talks about how early mockumentaries led into the found footage genre. If you have not been to my old panel, fear not, I'm going to give you a little review. First off, I just want to give like a little disclaimer that while the video clips that I'm going to play is not necessarily going to be super gruesome, I am going to talk a little bit about some of the questionable material that has been on some of those movies, and some of it might be a bit creepy, especially to younger children that might be watching. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is talk about what my other panel was. Basically, I traced the origins of found footage films back to Cannibal Holocaust, which came out in 1980. It was disgusting, and it was a controversial movie about a group of anthropologists, young anthropologists, that they got lost and eventually got eaten in the Amazon rainforest inhabited by cannibals. The film was full of animal cruelty, real animal cruelty, violence and harassment against the paid actors, and neglect towards the tribespeople, because they actually went to the Amazon and filmed real tribespeople, and they were not paid. The tribespeople were not paid, and most of them had no idea what the film crew were doing there. So there was quite a few criminal charges against the director, but with all that being said, Cannibal Holocaust is technically the very first found footage horror movie. And then, of course, it was popularized by the Blair Witch Project. There was a few that came out between Cannibal Holocaust and Blair Witch Project, but they didn't get as much traction. Blair Witch Project was really the movie that got the idea of found footage super popular. The film style that best describes found footage movies, and it also describes mockumentaries, is Cinema Vérité. That translates into film truth, or truth in cinema. And I'll dive deeper a little bit about how that style developed a bit later. But to really understand this genre and style of filming, we actually have to travel all the way back to when video cameras were invented. So I've got a little timeline on the top that we're going to follow the bouncing yellow dot as we go through. So in 1888, the first video footage that was ever captured was in 88, and it was the Roundhay Garden scene that was filmed in Great Britain, and it was literally like 2 seconds long. The first footage that was ever actually shown publicly as a thing to go and see was just a quick, probably like a minute, 2 minutes long, of a train pulling into a station, and that was done in 1985. And I'm actually going to show those clips here now when my settings go away so I can actually press the buttons. There we go. So this is the very first. Actually, I want to make sure that I'm showing this computer sound. Share computer sound. There we go. All right. So now you'll hear the sound. There's no sound in the first one, of course, but there is actually music in the second one. So here's the first ever from 1888. That was it. That was the whole thing. So then it loops. It's actually pretty amazing to be able to see that this was, you can only imagine like how excited they were to actually capture something finally. And here was the first thing that they showed publicly. So this is a train pulling into the station. And this was 1895. more seconds left of it, but that's basically it. So, when these first pieces of footage were released, they were called actualities. They weren't called movies or films or anything like that. They were actualities. And an actuality is defined as a short piece of film that's unedited, unstructured, and shows what they're filming exactly how it looked and how it seems in real life. So they didn't try to make up anything. The concept of an actuality eventually evolved into the concept of a documentary once cameras were able to collect footage that was longer than a couple of minutes. But documentary as a term was still not used. We used, as if I was alive back then, they used direct footage. Direct cinema. Direct cinema, that was the term that was used instead of documentary. Unlike fiction, direct cinema depicts events as they happen in real life with no influence from the filmographer. Direct cinema is still used as a term today and it describes what most documentaries use. So then we go ahead to 1922 with Kino Pravda. One aspect of direct cinema from the early era of filming that Russian director Cinema Vérité attempted to steer away from was narration. Even when films were silent, narration would appear on the screens as a text slide, or the director would dictate the narration when the film was, premiered or shown in real life. He'd kind of be standing there and reading it loud. Vertov created a series of 23 newsreels in 1922, and he titled them Kino Pravda, and that translates into film truth. They depict life in Russia at the time, and served as an education opportunity to learn about current affairs in Russia. Kino Pravda is what directly inspired Cinema Vérité, because they translate to the same thing, film truth. This series differed from most documentaries at the time in that it had almost no narration. There was a couple of very short text slides. And they also got really up close and personal with the people and got the people to, look at the camera and interact with the camera. And that was something that actualities and documentaries and stuff were not doing. So I'm going to show just a quick little bit of that. There's no music for this one. Oh, of course you've got to, okay, now we're good. So you see the camera is really close to the subjects instead of, being filmed from far off. So there is a couple of text slides like this, but compared to the documentaries that were coming out at the time, it was very minimal. They were more so just giving context of what you were watching rather than giving you information. And see, he's got the subjects looking at the camera. They're not pretending the camera is not there. So yeah, that was pretty revolutionary at the time. So at the same time, in the same year, we have Robert Flaherty. He was an American film director and was also moving away from standard documentaries, and he was making docufictions. This is a genre of documentary that uses fiction elements to strengthen the film's representation of reality. The earliest example of this is in his film Nanook of the North, which was released in 22. That was where he asked the Inuit people that he was filming in northern Canada to recreate some of the traditional practices that those people were known to do, regardless if they were still actually practiced by the people at the time. So it was kind of a fictional element, but it was still, showing information similar to a documentary, The first film that would be wholly considered as a work of docufiction was Moana, and that came out in 1926. So in Moana, he actually fabricated a relationship between the random Polynesian people of the community to make it seem like they were a family, and he did it to kind of strengthen how you reacted to the movie as you were watching it. It kind of gave you a more emotional reaction, thinking that they were family members. He also asked them to wear their traditional clothing, which a lot of them weren't wearing anymore because they were already being influenced by European settlers. But he asked them to wear their traditional clothing just to make it look more traditional, I guess. And he also got them to recreate a tattooing process that was like a coming of age thing that they used to do. But at the time that he was filming, that practice was pretty much obsolete. So a fun fact about Moana, it was actually re-released in 1980. So when it was first released in 26, there was no sound, of course. It was all silent. And one of the things that Robert Flaherty said was that he wished that he could have recorded and captured the singing, the music that that culture had, and he was really sad that he couldn't do that. His daughter actually went back in 1980 to the same place that Moana took place and got the people that were living there to voice over all of the people in the movies and she in the movie, and she also recorded sounds like water, rushing water, animals, wind, and she completely soundscaped the whole movie in 1980 and re-released it, and it was released with a title called Moana with Sound, and I'm just going to show you the trailer for that now. Oh, there's Nanook of the North. I'm not going to show that. Here's Moana with sound. It would help if, you know, it had sound. Oh, it is. It's very, very quiet. I'm sorry about that. I hope you guys can hear it.
And our intention, of course, was to make an authentic record of this dying culture. That was our mission.
She also redid all of the text slides. So instead of having the old, shaky looking style of text slides that you used to see in silent films, the text slides actually look exactly like these text slides. So she redid those to make it clearer. There's the tattooing process that they actually got somebody to get tattooed in the same tradition that they used to, even though it was an obsolete tradition. That's kind of a oxymoron, obsolete tradition. But Monica Flaherty, yeah, that was the daughter. So yeah, I think that was pretty incredible that she did that. All right, so on the timeline, you'll notice I'm about to skip 1932. We're going to come back to that one after. We're going to skip forward to 1939. So the trend of using fiction to support documentaries continued and is still used today. In fact, the concept of combining fiction and documentaries became so popular that a new subgenre was eventually born, pseudo-documentaries. These film and radio broadcasts are entirely fiction, but use documentary styles and elements to make them either pass as real or elicit the same emotions that one would have while watching a real documentary. And that can be kind of traced back to, in a way, traced back to 1939. There's probably earlier examples of it, but this is one of like the big ones that people talk about as starting pseudo-documentaries. Orson Welles directed and narrated a radio drama, War of the Worlds. It was based off of H.G. Wells' novel of the same name. He narrated the opening part of the novel first, and then the broadcast went on like a normal radio broadcast. And there was little interruptions here and there with fake news bulletins about alien invasions. He used the documentation style so well that it actually caused an intense panic through the people that were listening, because they believed that all the news bulletins that were coming into this fake radio show were real, and they thought that they were actually being invaded by aliens, even though, I mean, I guess it was people tuning in late that didn't hear the intro and stuff like that. So yeah, that really closely relates to how we see found footage movies coming out today, especially Blair Witch Project in the 90s. They did the same thing, but they intended for that to happen. They actually tried to make people believe that these 3 young adults in the movie were legitimately missing. Poor Wells did not intend for that to happen. Pseudo-documentaries can be directly linked as being the influence of mockumentaries and found footage today. Mockumentaries kind of going in the comedy style, while found footage went in the horror direction. But even before the emergence of these pseudo-documentaries, director Louis Buñuel created a documentary parody called A Land Without Bread. And that's where we're going to jump backwards now to 1932. Louis Buñuel was a Spanish filmmaker from the 20s and 30s. He was living in Paris, and he was out of work at the time. He was known to criticize documentaries for their unemotional and monotonous narration, especially how the narrator can basically get away with saying whatever he wanted, and any audience member would just kind of take it as fact, because oh, he's narrating a documentary, it must be true. But if you remember, I was just talking about pseudo-documentaries, docufictions, and these things were very prevalent at the time, and he wasn't liking that. So he decided that he was going to make a parody of that. So he heard about the poor living conditions of this really small Spanish village. I'm probably going to butcher this Spanish pronunciation, Las Verdes. So he came up with the idea to kind of critique documentation techniques and make this parody documentary about this village. He actually went to the village. He videotaped the people there, but then when he narrated, he made up almost everything he said. He falsified dying children. He filmed this sleeping baby, and the narration claimed that the baby was actually dead. There was a scene where a child was resting against some stairs, and the narration is like, this child has been laying here for 3 days. She's very terminally ill. We can't do anything for her. And he made the narration so monotonous to like parody how monotonous documentaries would, you know what I mean? I'm rambling, sorry. Yeah, so he also mentioned the medical practices that they had and how that was actually killing them rather than helping them. He mentioned the river where they get their water and said that that was contaminated. He said the people had never heard of bread, but then he also went on to say that teachers would bring bread in from rich communities and give it to the students and make the students eat it in front of them for fear of their starving parents taking it from them if they brought it home. He said that their biggest source of money was through orphan trade, which is where they would buy an orphan and then the government would give them money for having an orphan. Now that could actually technically be based on some truth, where, you know, the government subsidizes you because you're fostering a child. And he was claiming that this was like their main source of income, was this tragic orphan trade. And then he filmed this poor woman. She's like this old woman, and it was so random. I don't know why he even said it. He was just like, this woman is actually 32 years old. So I'm going to show a bit of that. Oh, here's some, okay, I've got to show you some War of the Worlds first. We got to go back because this is actually incredible. This is the first instance in War of the Worlds where they come in at the very first interruption. And just put yourself in that time and imagine sitting down, listening to music, and hearing this happen on the radio.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates the gas to be hydrogen and moving toward the Earth with enormous velocity. Professor Pearson of the observatory at Princeton confirms Farrell's observation and describes the phenomenon as, quote, like a jet of blue flame shot from a gun, unquote. We now return you to the music of Ramon Raquello, playing for you in the Meridian Room of the Park Plaza Hotel, situated in downtown New York.
Can you imagine sitting at home and your radio was like, we just saw explosions on Mars, and the velocity of the explosion is barreling towards Earth. But oh, keep listening to your music though. Like, wow. So here's, I had to go back and show that because that's wild. So you can understand why that created so much panic. So here's a little bit of Land Without Bread. So the scene I'm about to show you is going to show that old woman that he said, this woman is 32 years old. and then it's going to show the young girl resting on the steps that was apparently there for 3 days.
Ceci est le village de Martinandran. Ces croûtes que l'on voit entre les arbres qui évoquent la carapace d'un animal fabuleux ne sont autre chose que les toits du village. À l'entrée du village, un chœur de tout nous accueille. La majeure partie. Le goitre est la maladie spécifique des Urdes hautes qui constitue l'objet principal de ce reportage. Voyez cette femme avec son goitre, elle n'a pas plus de 32 ans. Nous visitons le village accompagné de l'alcade de Martinandran. Dans une rue déserte, nous rencontrons une fillette. Nous demandons à l'alcade ce qu'elle a. Il nous répond que depuis 3 jours, l'enfant reste là sans bouger. Elle doit être malade puisqu'elle se plaint. Mais nous ne parvenons pas à savoir ce qu'elle a. Un de nos amis s'improvise médecin, s'approche d'elle pour s'informer de ce qui lui fait mal à la gorge. Il lui demande d'ouvrir la bouche et nous pouvons voir ses gencives et sa gorge enflammée. Malheureusement, nous ne pouvons rien faire pour elle. 2 jours après, comme nous demandions de ses nouvelles, on nous a répondu que la fillette était morte.
That was totally untrue. And you can hear how so monotonous and straight and emotionless and pitiless he was delivering all of those lines. And that was so intentional because he was trying to parody how bad they were trying to do that for real, you know? Also, I was just informed that while I'm speaking, while the videos are playing, you can't quite hear my voice very well, so I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm only going to speak when the videos are paused. Sorry about that. All right, so that was his Land Without Bread. Unfortunately for Buñuel's parody, it did very little to change the standards of documentation, and pseudo-documentaries and docufictions remain prevalent. These early films will go on to inspire a lot of today's mockumentaries and found footage horror movies. But the more modern films like Cloverfield, Blair Witch Project, Wreck, and even The Office also take a lot of their filming techniques from Cinema Vérité, which is a term coined by Jean Rouch. So now we're going to fast forward to the 1950s. Rouch was an anthropologist and ethnologist, as well as a documentarian, and continued the tradition of docufictions by adding elements of fiction into documentaries in the form of ethnofictions. So ethnofictions are a subgenre of docufictions, but it's specifically used for anthropology and ethnology. Nanook of the North and Moana by Flaherty could be kind of seen as ethnofiction, but they're not technically labeled that because Flaherty wasn't an ethnologist, he was just a filmmaker. So they don't use that for anthropology, so it's not technically an ethnofiction. It wasn't until Jean Rouch that ethnofictions came about through the Mad Masters. That's this one right here. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce it in French, but it translates to the Mad Masters. So that came out in 1955. This was a really controversial and negatively received film when it came out. It was about the Hauka tradition in Niger, Africa. Extremely racist. It depicted the African people as really barbaric and uncivilized. And then in 1958, he released Moi un Noir, Me a Black. That was also filmed in Africa. It wasn't as racially controversial as the other one, but it still wasn't without its criticism, specifically about how he edited the film to make the people be portrayed the way he wanted them to be portrayed. But these films featured 2 very specific techniques that Rouch would later use to help define cinema verite, and that was jump cuts and using non-professional actors, like random people. So then we go forward a little bit more to 1961. Rouch continued to make these ethnofictions in Africa until about 1960. That was with the film Primary. So that was a documentary about John F. Kennedy. And it was Rouch's first attempt at trying to develop the cinema verite style, but he didn't actually have a word for it until 1961. And that's with this film, which translates into Chronicle of a Summer. He was able to finally put it into words, cinema verite. This film posed questions about working class happiness and life in Paris to regular people on the streets. And you see that all the time now on YouTube. YouTubers go out in the streets and ask random questions to people walking by. But at the time, that was like unheard of. He was the first person to do that, was to just take random people off the street and ask them questions and document that. So like, it's so prevalent now that that was just not a thing at the time. Yeah, so he used his experiences with making his ethnofictions and docufictions to come up with Cinema Vérité, and the term is a direct reference to Kino Pravda. He specifically referenced that, and he purposefully made them translate to the same thing, film truth. Cinema Vérité is a very broad genre. It encompasses a lot of aspects of film that we see in movies and TV shows today. The idea of film truth really refers to foregoing showmanship in movies in exchange for having raw footage. Edits are really simple. Film equipment is really simple. Scripts are minimal, sometimes entirely like not used. Sorry, I lost my place. There we go. Simple scripts. Yeah. And the filmographer is acknowledged by the subjects. So the people that he's filming looks at the camera, that kind of thing. These concepts are used in fiction and scripted films as well, and they do that by using really cheap equipment, purposefully making the camera really shaky to seem like you're filming it without prompt, you know. Harsh jump cuts, that became a really classic character specific example, I guess, of Cinema Vérité. No background music, because that obviously shows that you've edited the footage. Incorporating improvised scenes, and also whenever there's a mistake made, they like to keep those in because it makes it seem more raw and real. These elements can be used without trying to portray it as real. So The Office, we all know The Office stars a huge movie star. We know that's not real, but they use all of those elements to make it kind of feel like it's real. Or they can, and also Chronicle, the kids movie or teen movie Chronicle, where they get the superpowers. That one's clearly a Hollywood movie, but the same thing. It's the shaky camera work, make it seem like they did it themselves, you know. But can also be used to trick the audience. So Blair Witch Project and The Fourth Kind failed, but attempted to make it seem real. Regardless of what you do with the style, though, Cinema Vérité has been proven to be extremely versatile, as you'll see in my last slide, and effective in eliciting extreme emotions, whether it be fear in found footage films, laughter in mockumentaries, or suspense in the pseudo-documentaries. So my last slide shows just how versatile Cinema Vérité can be. So we have comedies. The Office is a comedy TV show, and Project X was a comedy movie, a teen movie about a guy trying to pull off the biggest party possible, and he's just filming his house party. Chronicle was like a teen movie, like I said, about the kids wake up with superpowers. Where is Rocky 2 is like, this is a interesting example of this style because it was actually a documentary, like none of it was staged or anything, but they filmed it like a blockbuster movie. So it was almost the opposite in a way of Cinema Vérité. He didn't use the shaky camera work. He used really high quality budget filming gear, but it was literally just a couple of guys. And what they were doing was looking for this art piece that was supposedly hidden in the desert. Some artist made a fake rock and hid it in the desert. And they learned about it and they're like, we're gonna go find this rock, and filmed it. It's called Where's Rocky 2? Trailer Park Boys, a Canadian example of humor and mockumentary. VHS, Blair Witch Project, Fourth Kind, those are classic examples of using found footage in horror. What We Do in the Shadows, hilarious. And the same thing, they're interacting with the camera. They're big budget actors, but they're looking at the camera and talking to you as if, you know, there's a guy filming us right now. And Marble Hornets is a fun example because it was a YouTube channel where he was trying to, you know, pass the Slender Man off as being real. So Marble Hornets was like a series of small YouTube videos, and he was kind of like, he was claiming that he was in the same vicinity as Slenderman, and Slenderman was coming around his house. And so a lot of it is really short clips of like figures going across his window, and that would be one video on YouTube. But holy heck, Marble Hornets got real popular. So yeah, this is just a really great example of how versatile that filming style is. And it's in everything. You don't realize how much it affected filming until you see this slew of different genres. So yeah, that's my panel. I'm gonna stop screen sharing now. Yeah, does anyone have any questions? You can turn your mics on now if you wanted.
I have two questions. Number one,
Nikki's.
Hornets' popularity affected by the those two girls killing that girl over Slenderman.
Ah, okay, yeah, that was something that I talked about in the first panel. So yeah, if you wanted to hear about that. So basically, when the Slenderman stuff was really, really popular, especially with the younger population, didn't really understand how fake it was. If nobody knows, Slenderman it started as a photo editing contest. It was like, here's a contest. We want you to edit a legitimate old photo and edit to make a fake creature in like the background of the photo or creeping up on the people in the photo or something like that, and submit it and see whose looks the realist. It was literally like framed as being fake. And this guy created the Slenderman character, edited it into like 3 old photos, and those photos, when you search up Slenderman, it's like the kid on the slide going up the slide and the Slenderman is in the background. That's his photos that won the contest. And yeah, and it blew up, and people were making these stories up about Slenderman, making videos like Marble Hornets did. And then there's these 2 young girls that were convinced that he was real and wanted to be his proxy. They were like, nope, yeah, we are gonna work for him. We're gonna sell our soul to him. They loved him. So much so, they were convinced that he lived in the forest near their home. And they were like, we need to prove to Slenderman that we are worthy of being his proxy. So they had this big plan to have a sleepover with their best friend, invited their best friend over, invited her out for a walk in the woods, and then attempted to murder her. They actually legitimately stabbed her 17 times. Miraculously, the girl survived. I think one of the stab wounds in her chest was like a millimeter away from killing her, going into her heart. But she survived 17 stabs by these ridiculous girls. Yeah. Did you just want me to talk about that? Was that your question?
Yes.
Okay.
The other question was, where can we see a copy of the 1980 film narrated by the daughter? Is it available?
I think it's for use. I think it's on YouTube.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah. Let me double check. While I'm double checking that, does anybody else have a question? No.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
How has the development of mockumentary filmmaking changed documentary filmmaking?
I think one thing, documentaries weren't necessarily attempting, especially early on, to look shaky the way Cinema Vérité style is. They wanted it to look high quality, even though it was a documentary, right? This low quality budget kind of stuff wasn't an aesthetic. It was it looked bad, right? So early on, documentaries wanted to look high quality. But as pseudo-documentaries and mockumentaries and stuff got popular, and the aesthetic of low quality budget kind of stuff was actually pleasing and people were seeking it out, I think that affected documentaries, real documentaries, to take on that quality as well. And it definitely affects how people watch it too, because it makes documentaries feel more real. right? You feel like you're experiencing it as well, rather than just watching it happen. Yeah. Of course, YouTube is only coming up with Disney Moana. Hold on, Moana with sound. That was what it was called. It seems like all that's coming up is, it says 1926, but they could have, if it has sound, like the speaking and the sound of the waves in the water and the singing, it's the 1980 re-release. Absolutely. The original release, I think, just had like classical music on top of it, or you can probably watch it completely silent. But if you find the version that has any sound at all, any type of background sound, that's the re-release. It does, but I can't seem to find it specifically labeled Moana with sound on YouTube or anything like that. Okay. Anyone else? I'm so ridiculous. Okay. Thanks. Do I have control over ending the... I don't. But yeah, that's my panel. Thanks everybody for watching. Maybe one day I'll have a part 3. Give me some suggestions on what you think I should branch off into from here to have a 3rd release. Thank you for the applause, Mary. The virtual applause. Yay! More applause. Thank you, Ernie. Jack.